Hey there, it's Dan Rickard. We're going to be looking at some bouncing of spheres today. Let's get started. First thing, Alt W, increase the size of your perspective window. We need to get a sphere on the scene. So we could just simply go in and make a sphere. Notice where the pivot point is. Remember what a pivot point actually is. It's the rotation point for an object. So if we rotate this, you can see that it rotates right around this center point. Well, we actually, for this, we actually want to bring this pivot point down to the base, and you'll see why in a few minutes. I'm going to leave this one in here. I'll make a new one, and as I make this one, I'm going to go down to here and click on base to pivot. Now what that's going to do is put the pivot point right at the base upon creation. So I'll click and drag. Notice where it's coming out of. Notice that it also placed it a little bit differently than the first one. And if I rotate it, it rotates around that bottom pivot point. Okay. Now, we will be doing a little bit of squash and stretch on this. And if I do squash and stretch, I want to use the proper squash tool. If you look up here and click and hold, it'll give you 3 different options. You can also type R several times to cycle through those. So with this one, I've got select and squash turned on. I'm going to just show you what happens. Okay, so you can see how it squashes, but look exactly where it's squashing from, right from the center of the object. Well, we could use this for a ball bounce right now, but you know what? If we squash this one from the center or from the bottom of it, it works a little bit better with interacting on this ground plane. Okay, so for right now, we're just going to use that ball. So I'm going to move this over to 0, 0, 0. You don't necessarily have to, but it's a good idea to keep that as a kind of a rule of thumb. Something else that I like to do, at least when I work on this type of exercise, I like to put some type of object on the ground so I can better interact with it. If I use a plane, that works to a point, right? You can kind of see where that is. But when you go to a side view, planes you can't really see because they're actually less than paper thin, right? A plane or a polygon, for example, is only one-sided. So paper is 2-sided, right? You have a front and a back. Polygons, you only have a front. So what I usually do is just use a box. I'll create a box, and I'll drag it down. And when I go to the front view, I can actually see the surface that I'm working on. All right, so I'm actually going to stay in this view. Okay, so I'm going to hit Auto key. Lets me prepare my scene here for animation. And I'm also going to move my timeline, make it a bit smaller. So I'm going to hold down Alt and Control and use my right mouse button down in the timeline, and I'm going to click and drag. Okay, you can see what happens. If I use my left, it drags the other side. Okay, and if I use my middle mouse, it just moves it back and forth. So it doesn't actually scale it; it just moves it back and forth. Okay, so what I want, I'm going to say about 20 keyframes in here. Okay, so 20 keyframes, and we'll select the ball, and I want to just lock in this value for where it is. So if we start talking about ball bouncing, we need to think about animation states. So we've got this bottom state, or this contact state, but we also need a hovering state, right? It's a ball bounce, so it has to start up here and bounce and come back. So I'm going to lock this in midway by hitting K. So I've just created a keyframe by hitting K. Make sure this is selected. And if I go back to 0, I'm going to lift up. Okay, so that's the top of my bounce. Now notice the keyframe. It's a red keyframe as opposed to a tri-colored keyframe. That's because all we did for this movement was we moved it up. So we just stored positional data in this keyframe. This one has position, rotation, and scale data. That's why there's 3 different colors. Just for fun, if I was to scale this object at this point, watch down here, I'll scale it. Now it's got a blue mark inside the keyframe. Okay, so that's the scale data. The green data is, or the green part of the keyframe is your rotation. So I'm going to undo that, Control Z. Now to make this a looping animation, we have to copy that first keyframe over to keyframe 20. Okay. Now, but even before I start copying that keyframe, I do want to retain this shape for the top of my bounce. Usually in some type of arcing bounce, if it kind of comes through and comes back up, usually the arc, the top of the arc, the center of the arc is going to have roughly the 100% scale where it's back to its regular shape. So I want to actually key this in. So I'm going to hit K and just lock those values in. Now I want to select this key and hold Shift and just drag that key over to 20. Okay, so I've got a key here, a key at the bottom, and a key at 20. If I press play by hitting my question mark, you can see I've got this ball that moves up and down. It doesn't necessarily bounce yet because we need impact. We need some type of impact as it hits the ground. So that's where we start going into looking at our curves. So when we look at the curves, we've got several blue lines in here. X, Y, Z position. Z position, as you see here in the world axis, the Z position is up, so we're going to click on Z. If we read the curve editor, we have the time across the bottom and the value up the side. So this is the time for us, our timeline, and our value was moving the ball up. So at keyframe 0, let's go ahead and read our curves. At keyframe 0, which is down here, we have this value. So it's about 59 something. You can actually see down here it's 59.338. And if we scrub through to the next key, at keyframe 10, which is 10, we have a value of 0. Well, that just happens to be a value of 0. And because we copied the first keyframe, we have the same value over here. Okay, so really you just have to learn how to read your curve editor to really see what's going on. The one thing to understand though is that these are the keys, and we're not going to change these keys, but we're going to change the way it interpolates between keys. This road map here, this line that goes back and forth, this is called your function curve or your F curve. So if this changes really drastically, it's going to change the way your ball looks. Okay, so we are actually going to change this right now. If we look at it as we press play, this looks very smooth as it, well, maybe a little bit laggy for you as you're watching this video, but it looks very smooth as it goes up and down. We need some impact. So we're actually going to select this key. And if I hold down Shift, I can grab one of these Bezier handles and lift it up. I can do the same on the other side. And already, even just by looking at this curve, I can picture a ball coming down, hitting, and bouncing away. If I undo this, I've never seen a ball come down and slide across the ground and then fly back up again. Okay, so this curving, smooth part at the bottom just simply doesn't work for us. So I can move this up by holding Shift and just dragging those ends, or an easier way, you can simply select it and hit Set Tangents to Fast. There you go. Try pressing play and see what happens. Okay, we're getting there. Starting to have a little bit more of a bounce feel to it. You can maybe try increasing your hang time here at the top, so drawing this hovering aspect a little bit farther out. So I'm gonna keep Control held, and that'll help lock it in. I can't move it vertically right now. If I take Control off, you can see I can move it vertically. So I'm going to hold down Control and just move it straight out. I'm going to do the same on the other side. That's going to help with a little bit of hang time. Maybe I'll even take this, I'll put it back to, let's say a spline. Notice the Bezier handles on this icon. And I can move these by holding Shift. I can maybe tighten these up a little bit more. There we go. So I don't mind that. So that's a basic ball bounce. Okay. I'm going to pause this now, and the next video is going to introduce a little bit of squash and stretch to it.